This lecture is huge. However, it does not introduce any new Python tools, and so you can consider this to be optional if you like. In it, I am going to be developing a program from the beginning. I'm going to figure out what information I need to read, and I need to figure out how I'm going to store it and what functions I'm going to write. This is meant to give you a taste of the thought process that I go through when I write a program. This file contains a bunch of Assignment 1 grades. There's a header, followed by a blank line, followed by a list of student number and grade on Assignment 1. We would like to know the distribution of these grades, so we're going to keep track of categories. How many ended up in the range 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, and so on. And we will have also a category for the people who got 100. We ultimately, in this program, want to create a new file containing this information and also 1 star for each grade that was in that range. So we see a 77.5. That means that in our output file, we'd like a star there. There's a 37.5, that's in that range. We see a 62.5, a 72.5, so we have 2 numbers in the 70 range so far. There's 100. We've got a 55, 95, something in the 80s, something in the 90s, and so on. Eventually, we will have 1 star for each number in the file so that we can see the distribution of grades. In order to get a program that does this, we need to do the following steps. Step 1 is going to be read the grades. And this is a natural list into a list. It's a list situation. So we're going to read the grades into a list. That's step 1. Step 2 is going to be count the number of grades per range. And step 3 is going to be write the histogram to the file. Whichever file the user picks. This process of writing down the steps at a very high level is called top-down design. When we first get a problem, it's often a bit overwhelming wondering how we're going to accomplish this the whole task, so we break it down into steps. Once we decide on how we're going to store our data, we can do these steps in any order that we like because they are roughly independent and we can test each of them separately. Let's start a new program. And let's take some notes. We'll get those scribbles down into text. Writing stuff out by hand, like we did here, just the example of the output that we want, and then the list of steps that we think we need to take in order to get this program to work, actually has a huge benefit. It allows you to step away from the programming environment and just think about how you might solve the problem. This is essential. Programs are just expressions of algorithms that you have in your head. And if you figured out what you need to do, you'll have a much easier time writing the code. Let's make a note about the format that we want. We want 0 to 9, and then a star or 2, 10 to 19. We want those to line up. 20 to 29, maybe there are that many, and so on, all the way up to 90 to 99. Whoops, we want that outdented. And then the hundreds. Now that I have that, I can get rid of the scribbles. We're going to be reading from files, and they're going to be files that the user selects. We want this to work with any assignment file of this format, not just this particular file, and so we're going to use tkinter's file dialog. We'll start by asking the user for a file, and then just reading the file. We now have variable a1 file name being what tkinter.fileDialog.askOpenFile returns, so let's open the file. We're going to, for line in a1 file, just print the line, just to make sure that we are in good shape. This process of checking frequently about how our program is doing is a very good habit to get into because it allows you to catch syntax errors and logic errors early before you've made a mess of things. So we run the module, and we see invalid syntax. Oh, yes, wrong kind of print statement. That was in my old Python 2.7 days. We'll save that and try one more time. I've made a shorter grades file just so that we don't have to work with so many numbers at once. And I have a type error. The problem here is that I'm using AskOpenFile instead of AskOpenFileName. AskOpenFile actually opens the file for you, but I like to do it in 2 steps because I think it's more explicit for people who are just learning how to program. I'll select Run Module again. It has us pick our input file, and phew, we have it. This file has about maybe 9 grades in it. This process of running frequently has found 2 errors early on in only my 6 or so lines of code. And yet it's going to have saved me a ton of time later on when I have 150 lines of code. If I had tried to wait until I had most of the program written, I would have been much less clear about where I needed to go to look to see where my problems were. I can get rid of these lines of code now because I know now that I have my file open for reading properly. I need to do the same thing with my histogram file. I need better names for the histogram file. That seems reasonable. I like to keep my main program separate from the functions that I rely on in my main program. So just like with assignment 1 and assignment 2, I will start a file just to contain the functions. I'll call it grade.py. And I know I'm going to have to import it. My steps are reading the grades into a list, counting the grades per range, and writing the histogram to the file. We will start with reading the grades into a list. Because I'm reading from a file, it's hard to get an example. So we'll start with the type contract. I know that I have a file open for reading. And I know that it's going to return a list, and that all these numbers in this file are floats. So it's a list of float. Need an extra space there, get my indentation proper. And what this is going to do is read and return the list of grades in the file. Well, I need a header. Read grades is what I'm doing. It's a nice verb phrase, and I'll call this grade file. So now I can finish up my docstring grade file. There we go. I need to know that this file is in the right format. So a precondition to calling this function is that guard file. Grade file starts with a header that contains contains no blank lines and has a blank line because I need to be able to skip that header. And then I need to know that each line is in this format where there's a student number and a grade. In order to accomplish this, I first need to skip over the header and then read the grades, accumulating them into a list. I'm following the same top-down approach. I'm writing out the steps that I need to do in order to accomplish this smaller task. But it's the same approach, the same top-down design. In order to skip over the header, we will read the first line, and then as long as that line is not the new line character, I need to read the next line. Now I have just read the blank line, so now I need to read the grades, accumulating them into a list. Well, I know I'm going to be reading that first grade, and then as long as what I read, as long as I haven't reached the end of the file, and I write it like that, if you recall, file line is not the empty string, then I want to do the same thing. I want to do gradefile.readLine. So this is going to read every line in the rest of the file. What I need to do now is into this pattern, I need to accumulate the grades. In order to make that happen, I need my accumulator variable. I'll start off with an empty list. This is going to contain all of the grades in the file. As long as I haven't reached the end, I know I have a grade. So now we have a string containing the information for a single student. We're going to find the last space in the line, that's the space right before the number, and extract only the rest of the characters after that. So find the last space and take everything after that space. Well, I know that line.rFind finds from the right. So I'm looking for the rightmost space. That gives me back the index of the rightmost space in the line. I would like to slice the line starting at 1 past that position, the first digit, and go up until the end of the string. So this will extract that for me. Well, save that in a variable. I have the number, but it's currently a string because line is a string, and when I slice, I get a string. So when I append to my grades list, I would like to turn that into a float. I think we're almost done. I have my list of grades now, and so that is what I'm going to return. Let's try it out. I'm going to run this so that I have access to read grades in the shell. I'm going to, I'm going to ask for tkinter.file dialog. I need to import this. I'm going to ask for a file. We will take our test file. Now I need to come here and open that file. And finally, I'm going to call read grades on that open file. This is going to return to me, hopefully, a list of the floats that we see on the screen here. And it looks like we have all of them. With that quick test, I think I'm ready to call read grades from my main program. Now I know how to read the grades into a list. The next task is to count the grades for each of the range categories that we see here. Now, let's go start designing it. With this one, we actually can have an example. We have to decide what we're going to call this. Maybe grade ranges. We can always change our mind later. And we now know that if we give it a list like this, we actually have an example of this. What we would like it to do is maybe return a new list with the counts. So we know that we have how many zeros? We've got 2 in the 0 to 9 point something range. We have nothing in the 20s. Oops. We have 1 number in the 30s. We have no numbers in the 40s, 1 number in the 50s, 2 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers in the 70 range, no 80s, no 90s, and 1 100. So this hopefully is what we're going to be able to return. We're going to 0, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 10, 20, whoops, I'm off by 1. Zeros, no 10s, no 20s, 130, no 40s, 150, no 60s, 4 70s, no 80s, no 90s, and 1 100. So 2, 3, 4, 8, 9 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 numbers. So I think I've constructed my example correctly. I'm going to move this over here for just a minute so I can examine the histogram here. So this is the histogram that I ultimately want, and what I've seemed to have decided here is that at index 0 I'm going to count all the numbers that are in range 0 to 9. At index 1, in my result of this grade ranges function, I'm going to count the number of 10s, number of 20s, number of 30s, and so on. And index 0 is the zeros, index 1 is the 10s, index 2 is the 20s, index 3 is the 30s. So I seem to have the index number be the tens digit. 30s, 40s at index 4, 50s at index 5, 90s at index 9, 100s at index 10. So yes, that does seem to be what I'm getting. Understanding this data representation, how I'm storing information and what each index means and how it corresponds to these ranges here, is going to, again, save me a ton of time later on when I try to implement this function. I'm going to grab this here and I'm going to take a few notes about what I just figured out. Zero to 9 is index 0, this is index 1, this is index 2, and so on. This is index 9, and this is index 10 in my result. Well, I seem to be giving it, if I fix that there, I seem to be giving this a list of float, and it's giving me back a list of int. And this seems to be returning a list of int where each index indicates how many grades were in these ranges. Grade ranges doesn't seem to quite capture the idea, so I'm going to put count grade ranges. Takes in the list of grades. That means I need to change my example here. And that does seem a better verb phrase. My result is 11 numbers long, and I want to keep track of this count, so range counts is going to be, well, they all start off at 0. So this will give me a list of length 11, of ints that are all 0, and I'm going to update this as I look at each number. And I need to figure out how I'm going to take that 77.5 and just get that the tens digit there so that I can use that as an index into this range counts list. Any number from 70 up through 79.9 should end up with just the 7. So I'm going to come over here and experiment a little bit. 77.5, and just divide by 10. I'll end up with 7.75. I want to get rid of that 0.75, so I'll use the other form of division where I throw away the fractional portion. Does that work if I just have a 70? Yep, how about a 79.9? Good. Coming back to my program, that means that once I have a grade from my list, I want to use this division, and then I'm going to be using that as an index into range count, so I need to cast that result to an int. For each grade in the grades file, I need to know which range I want to add 1 to in range counts. Well, I had just figured out that I can take that grade and divide it by 10, and turn that result into an int. So this will tell me the index into the range counts list that I want to increment. So range counts is, range counts at index which range is what was there plus 1. After I've looked at all of the grades, I'm done. So I'll just return that list. It's time to test it, so let's grab that list there, run this module, call this, and compare. 20010104001. Awesome. 2 steps down, 1 to go. I know in my main program here that I want to count the grades per range. I now have a lovely little function to do that for me. So range counts is going to be what I get back from count grade ranges and passing in grades. Let's try it out. All we're going to do is print range counts and see how we do, see whether we seem to be making progress. Let's go to run module. It says, okay, which one do we want to open? We'll open our test file here. And where do we want to save it? Well, I'm going to eventually save it in a1test.hist, hist for histogram, but we're not actually writing anything to that file, but I still need to select it because I was asked to do so. And it says name read grades is not defined. How can that be? Ah, I see. I need to use these through the name of the module. I also noticed that I want to ask save as file name because this is the output file. Let's restart it. That kills our Python program, so that's not hanging around. And we'll try one more time. We're asked for our input file, there it is. We're asked for our output file. We'll choose that one. And it says, are you sure you want to do that? Yeah, check my name, that is the one I want to replace. We get the same list printed here, so our main program is now working so far. Now that I have my list of counts for each range, it's time to write the histogram to the file. I'm done with this print statement, so I will comment it out, just in case I need to uncomment it later on. Come back to my function file, where I'm storing all my functions, and I need to write the histogram. So, following our design process, I know that I'm going to call it and pass in that the grade range list that I had generated. So I get this range counts information and also the file that's been opened for writing. So I know that I've got a list of int and a file open for writing. It doesn't return anything. All it does is it writes the file. A histogram of stars based on the number, having trouble typing today, of grades in each range. Wonder if it's frustrating watching me make these mistakes. Well, I have an example of the output that I want. And I'll just paste this so that whoever calls help on this can see what is expected. What does this do? It writes a histogram, so write histogram seems a reasonable name. We know this is the range counts and that we have a histogram file that we're going to be writing to. The first line of output and the last line of output are slightly different. There are more spaces after the number. I want these to line up, so I want these stars to line up. So when I print the first line and when I print, I guess, write the last line, I need to write a few extra spaces. So I'm going to deal with them separately. Here we go. We first want to write 0 to 9. And then we want to write how many spaces? 1, 2, 3. Write does not put a new line character at the end, which is good because now I want to write some stars. So I know I want to write some stars, and how many are there? Well, it's however many grades were in that range. So we're going to multiply the asterisk by whatever is in range counts at index 0, which is the number of grades that were in the range 0 through 9. I then want to start a new line, because as you can see, the 10 through 19 grades appear on the next line. I'll take care of the other special case now. And here we want to write 100, and rather than range counts at index 0, it's actually range counts at the last index. That'll give me the number of 100s that were found in the file. In between, I want to write one line for each of the indices 1 through 9. So for I in range 1 up to but not including 10. And what does this do? This writes the 2-digit ranges, 10s, 20s, 30s, and so on. I need to figure out the low number and the high number for the current range. So when I is 1, I need to figure out the 10 and the 19. When I is 2, I need 20 and 29, and so on. So the low index is just I times 10. The high index is I times 10 plus 9. Just to check, 9 times 10 is 90 plus 9 is 99, so that'll work for 90 as well. So yep, that seems to give me the low and the high. I'm going to write low, but I need to give it a string, so low, stir of low plus the hyphen in between the low and the high, and then high, followed by a colon and a space. Once I've written that, then it's time to write the asterisks. So I want to multiply that by range counts at which index? Well, index I. And finally, I want to write the new line. test this in one of two ways. I can do what I was doing before and run this and then come up with an example of range counts and an output file and make sure that that file is written, but this is the last step in my program, so I actually can do that here. Now I've got this information elsewhere, so I'm going to delete it. What I want to do now is write the histogram with the range counts and my output file, which is A1hist file. I verified that my program seems to be working so far. I can just run this in order to check to make sure that this new function does what I want it to. We'll try our a1test.txt, and we want to write it to a1test.hist. Yep, we want to replace it. Uh-oh, I have a not writable problem here. It seems to be saying that when I call histfile.write, it says that that is an unsupported operation, that histfile is not writable. And that makes sense because I opened it for reading because I copied and pasted and forgot to change that. Let's run this one more time. There's my test input. No, I don't want to write my program there. Let's save that, replace. Okay, no errors. We're going to switch to the Finder now. Ah, there I am. Don't look. Grades examples, and I just wrote a1test.hist. We'll open this in TextEdit, and it's empty. Now I need to go find out why. Let's go back and take a look at the program. Oh, I think I forgot to close my files. If you don't close your files, then the data may not be written right away. We'll try one last time. Head back, see how we did. And there's our information. Let's try running it on our larger data file. a1.txt is our large one, and we will save it to a1hist. Yeah, I'd like to replace that. Switching back to the Finder, a1hist. Aha! Beautiful! Look at that! And that is really kind of how I write programs. I start out at the very beginning with only a vague idea of what I want, and I have a bunch of decisions to make. What are my steps? What data am I going to be storing, and how am I going to be storing it? And which order am I going to write my functions in, and how am I going to test them? I hope this was fun.